The 2,000-mile Oregon Trail cut from Missouri to Oregon through harsh terrain and challenging weather conditions. The journey was rough and dangerous, and pioneers were expected to follow strict rules if they hoped to survive the trip. The first concern for pioneers looking to conquer the Oregon Trail was forming a group, or train, that would travel the route together, sharing wagons, drivers, tools, food, and medical supplies. By then, those preparing to make the journey would have sold off their homes, businesses, and anything they couldn't bring with them, and invested in supplies for the journey. However a train was organized, it was vital that it was set off from the east at the correct time of year. If pioneers set off in the winter months, there was a really good chance that they'd get caught up with snow and blizzards, and you can guess how that'd work out. Lots of routes cut through high-altitude mountain passes where snow and ice remained for many months of the year. Travelers were obliged, therefore, to begin the journey in the spring, so instead of freezing to death, they just got to deal with dust clouds and intense heat. Oh joy. Now, there were smaller groups heading out on the Oregon Trail, but with the other larger trains, they were organized among strangers with a common goal. They included an average of 30 wagons, but could be as large as 200, which together carried the luggage and supplies of hundreds of people, usually families. Occasionally, a group would total over 1,000 people.
Nearly 500,000 pioneers traveled west, carving ruts so deep they're still visible almost 200 years later.
Such large numbers on such a dangerous route required management and expertise. For this reason, many wagon trains operated a hierarchy with appointed captains and officers. Travelers typically signed contracts with train organizers, which outlined the fees they would pay upon their safe arrival. Groups typically agreed to abide by a written constitution, which gave officers the power to make decisions on the group's behalf, such as where to camp each night. There were other practical rules too, such as those stipulating the rotating order of the wagons so that each party bore an equal share of the dust kicking up into the air. Everybody got a chance to be covered in dirt. The contracts and constitutions signed by travelers upon joining a wagon train typically included a system of laws tailored for that specific pack. Those containing religious groups, for example, such as missionaries or Mormons, would have the timing of religious services included in the travel contracts, and might have assurances of rest on Sundays. The constitution of any individual wagon train might have included banning gambling or drinking, or rules regarding hunting and other activities that might help or hinder the traveling party.
Remember to leave 3 feet for God. Our Lord has very wide hips.
On top of this, the paperwork included frameworks for communal voting and decision-making, arbitration, and any form of justice that the group would adopt to overcome grievances between travelers or punish those who failed to follow the laws of the train. Violators could find themselves banished and forced to try and make it on their own.
If you steal, you will stay where you stole.
The code also outlined how pioneers were expected to act during an attack and whether they would have to take up arms.
None of you have firearms.
Do we need them?
For extra protection as they rested after a day's travel, they would arrange wagons in a circle or square to create a campsite and pen for livestock. The Oregon Trail back in the 1800s was nothing but rugged, barely distinguishable paths winding through challenging wild terrain. Most of those who made the journey did so with the use of covered wagons called prairie schooners. The carriages were roughly 4 feet wide and 10 feet long, waterproofed with oil and covered with cotton canvas. The terrain was rough, and the vehicles weighed around 1,300 pounds when empty, so it was extremely important to travel as light as possible. This meant making tough decisions about what possessions to leave behind. Already forced to part with much of their property, those on the Oregon Trail were often required to lighten the schooners even more in the face of difficult terrain or the loss of mules, meaning that the trail was littered with discarded objects. Obviously, the trails were very rough, and extra weight would have just slowed things down. Able travelers tended to walk alongside the schooners, covering around 16 miles a day on foot. More than 300,000 people set off on the Oregon Trail, taking their lives into their hands to find new life out west. Pioneers faced a barrage of other risks on the journey: exhaustion, malnutrition, and dehydration. Disease in particular took many lives and often decimated the populations of traveling wagon trains. Smallpox, tick-borne diseases, and scurvy all took their toll on those heading out west, though cholera, which people caught primarily through drinking contaminated water, could kill within hours of being contracted and was the most feared and deadly illness of all. Well, the second most feared. Come on, say it with me. Dysentery.
Yesterday morning, he was fine.
It is very quick.
Cholera and dysentery are both really bad, and you don't want either, but if disease didn't get you, there were plenty of other ways to die. The danger was compounded by the risk of accidents and violence. Although attacks by Native Americans were rare, they did happen, generally near the end of the journey, and were often quite violent. It is believed that up to 1 in 10 pioneers died on the Oregon Trail, a total of around 30,000 people, including many children and pregnant women. Because wood was a precious commodity on the route, those who died were often buried in articles of their own luggage or wrapped in blankets. Often, bodies were buried directly on the trail so that the wagons passing over the grave would compact the earth and prevent grave robbers and wild animals from digging them up. Where the dead couldn't be buried underground, their remains were just covered in rocks. The Oregon Trail is as much a graveyard as it is a trail.